Commander Jake Morrison stood at the large window of his office, watching the stars shine bright in the dark space around Kepler Station. The space station was huge, bigger than most cities back on Earth. It floated quietly in the empty space. Between three different star systems, far from any planet or moon, this was the Galactic Military Academy, the most important school in all of known space. Children from dozens of different alien species came here to learn together. They studied math, science, history, and languages. They also learned how to work together, even though they came from very different worlds. Jake's daughter Lucy was one of the human students at the academy. She was 15 years old and very smart. Lucy had made friends with many alien children during her 2 years at the school. There was Zek, a young Krolix warrior who was learning to control his natural fighting instincts. There was also Myra, a Vorthek girl who could solve math problems faster than most computers. And there was Len, a Selenian boy who could speak. 12 different languages dot the academy had been Jake's idea originally. 5 years ago, he had suggested that children from different species should learn together. Many alien leaders had thought it was a bad idea. They worried that their children might fight or that cultural differences would cause problems. But Jake had convinced them that young minds were more open to friendship than adult minds. Now, hundreds of children from across the galaxy studied at the academy. The school had 3 main sections. The residential area had comfortable rooms for students to live in. The educational complex had classrooms, laboratories, and libraries. The recreational zone had sports fields, swimming pools, and entertainment centers designed for different species. Jake walked through the corridors of the academy every day. He loved seeing human children playing games with alien kids. He watched as they helped each other with homework, shared meals from their homeworlds, and laughed at jokes that crossed language barriers. This was what he had dreamed of when he first proposed the academy. The security at the academy was very good. The station had powerful shields that could stop most weapons. Defense drones patrolled the space around the station. Inside, security cameras watched every corridor and room. There were also emergency protocols that could lock down the entire station if needed. On this particular morning, Jake was reading reports from Earth when his communication device beeped. It was a message from the Academy's main computer system. The message said that all systems were working normally. Jake smiled and went back to his paperwork. In the residential section, Lucy was having breakfast with her friends in the main cafeteria. The large room was filled with the sounds of different languages as children from various species talked about their classes and weekend plans. Lucy was eating scrambled eggs, while Zek was consuming some kind of raw meat that was normal food for his species. I heard that we're going to have a field trip to the asteroid mining facility next week, Mira said, her large eyes blinking slowly as she spoke. That sounds boring, Len replied, his blue skin changing to a lighter shade, which meant he was feeling playful. I would rather visit the diplomatic station near the Centauri system. Lucy laughed. You just want to practice your language skills. With the ambassadors there. The children continued talking as they finished their breakfast. They had no idea that danger was approaching their safe home in space. Far from the academy, a group of ships moved quietly through space. These ships belonged to the Zarian Collective, a group of aliens who disagreed with the peaceful cooperation between species. They believed that different species should stay separate and never mix their cultures or technologies. The Zarian ships had special cloaking devices that made them invisible to most sensors. They had been planning this attack for months. Their goal was to capture the children at the academy and use them to force the galactic government to change its policies. The leader of the Zarian force was a tall, thin alien named Vex. He had gray skin and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. Vex hated the academy and everything it represented. He thought that mixing different species was wrong and dangerous. Are all teams ready? Vex asked his commanders through the communication system. Team Alpha is in position near the main docking. Bay, came the first reply. Team Beta is approaching the power station, said another voice. Team Gamma is ready to disable the communication arrays, reported a third commander. Vex nodded with satisfaction. His plan was simple but effective. First, they would disable the station's defenses and cut off communication with the outside galaxy. Then, they would capture the children and take them to a secret location. The galactic government would have to negotiate with the Zarian Collective to get the children back safely. Back at the academy, the morning classes were starting. Lucy was in her physics class, learning about how faster-than-light travel worked. Zek was in combat training, practicing with weapons that were designed not to cause real harm. Mira was in her advanced mathematics class, solving equations that most adults couldn't understand. Jake was in a meeting with other academy staff members. They were discussing plans for the next semester and reviewing student progress reports. The meeting was going well, and everyone was in a good mood. Suddenly, the lights in the meeting room flickered. Jake looked up from his papers, confused. The lights flickered again, and then the room went dark for a few seconds before emergency lighting turned on. What was that? Asked Dr. Helen Price, the Academy's head of education. Jake pressed a button on his communication device. Security, this is Commander Morrison. We just had a power fluctuation. What's your status? There was no response. Jake tried again. Security, please respond. Still nothing. A bad feeling started growing in Jake's stomach. He stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, he could see small flashes of light near the outer edge of the station. Those look like weapon discharges, he said quietly. At that moment, the emergency alarm system activated. A loud, piercing sound filled the air, and red lights began flashing throughout the station. An automated voice spoke over the intercom. System, emergency alert. All students and staff report to designated safe zones immediately. This is not a drill. Emergency alert. Jake felt his blood turn cold. His daughter was somewhere in this station, and it was under attack. The emergency message from Kepler Station reached the Galactic Defense Council within minutes of the attack. The council chambers on the capital world of New Geneva became a scene of controlled chaos as representatives from every major species hurried to their seats. Admiral Kestar of the Krolix Imperium was the first to speak. He was a massive creature, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with thick armored skin and sharp teeth. His species had evolved from predators, and they were known throughout the galaxy as the finest warriors. The situation is clear, Kestar said, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. Separatist forces have taken control of the Academy. They are holding our children hostage. We must act quickly, but we must act smart. General Theises of the Vorthic Intelligence Division stood next. The Vorthic were much smaller than the Krolix, but their large brains made them excellent at planning and strategy. Tice's pale gray skin looked almost white under the chamber's lights. Our preliminary analysis suggests this a coordinated attack by the Zarian Collective, Theises said, her voice soft but clear. They have been planning this for months. They chose the Academy because it represents everything they oppose about our peaceful cooperation. Commander Zelen of the Selenian Pacification Corps was the third to speak. The Selenians were masters of negotiation and psychological warfare. Their blue skin could change colors to show their emotions, and right now Zelen's skin was a deep purple, indicating serious concern. We cannot simply charge in with weapons firing, Zelen warned. The children are in great danger. One wrong move could result in tragedy. We need a careful, precise operation. The debate continued for over an hour. Each species offered their elite military units for the rescue mission. The Krolix proposed their death commandos, warriors who had never failed a mission. The Vorthix suggested their shadow operatives, who could infiltrate any location without being detected. The Selenians offered their negotiation specialists, who might be able to talk the Separatists into surrendering. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the observation area, watching the proceedings with growing frustration. As a human military officer, he had been invited to attend the meeting, but he was not allowed to participate in the planning. The alien commanders considered humans too emotional and unpredictable for such a delicate operation. Admiral Kestar, Jake said, standing up, I request permission to join the rescue operation. I know the Academy better than anyone here, and my daughter is among the hostages. Kestar turned to look at Jake, his yellow eyes studying the human carefully. Commander Morrison, we appreciate your knowledge of the facility, but this operation requires cold calculation, not emotional reactions. Your personal involvement would compromise the mission. I can be objective, Jake insisted. I've been a soldier for 20 years. General Theises shook her head. Humans are known for their emotional responses in crisis situations. Your species lacks the discipline required for this type of operation. We need surgical precision, not desperate heroics. Jake wanted to argue, but he knew it would be useless. The alien commanders had made up their minds. They would handle the rescue mission their way, with their elite forces and careful planning. The planning session continued for several more hours. The alien commanders studied detailed maps of the Academy. They analyzed the Separatists' known tactics and equipment. They calculated the best approach routes and escape plans. Admiral Kestar's Death Commandos would lead the assault. These elite Kralix warriors were equipped with the most advanced weapons and armor in the galaxy. They could fight in any environment and overcome almost any obstacle. General Tice's shadow operatives would provide intelligence and reconnaissance. These Vorthix specialists could move through the Academy unseen, gathering information about the Separatists' positions and the children's locations. Commander Zellen's pacification corps would handle the hostage situation. These Selenian experts were trained to minimize casualties and protect civilian lives during combat operations. The plan was complex and detailed. Each team had specific objectives and timetables. They would coordinate their movements down to the second. Nothing would be left to chance. But all of this planning took time. Hours passed as the alien commanders refined their strategy. They wanted to make sure everything was perfect before they began the operation. Meanwhile, news of the attack was spreading throughout the galaxy. Communication networks carried the story to every inhabited system. Parents across dozens of worlds learned that their children were in danger. On Earth, the news hit the human colonies especially hard. The Academy had been a source of pride for humanity. It represented their acceptance into the galactic community and their children's bright future among the stars. Linda Carter was working in the maintenance bay of a mining station when she heard the news. Her son Danny was a student at the Academy. He was only 13 years old, and he had been so excited about going to school with alien children. Linda dropped her tools and ran to the communication center. She tried to call the Academy, but all communications were blocked. She tried to reach the Galactic Defense Council, but she was told that only authorized personnel could get information about the crisis. Tony Rodriguez was repairing a cargo ship when his wife called him with the news. Their twin daughters, Maria and Sophia, were both at the Academy. They had been there for 3 years and loved their studies. Tony left his work immediately and rushed home. He found his wife crying in their kitchen, staring at the news reports on their communication screen. Dr. Karen Wright was teaching a class about alien biology when her assistant interrupted with the emergency message. Her daughter Amy had been at the Academy for only 6 months, but she had already made many friends among the alien students. Karen dismissed her class and hurried to her office. She began making calls to anyone who might have more information about the crisis. But like Linda and Tony, she was told that the situation was being handled by the proper authorities. Pete Johnson was working in his fields when his neighbor brought him the news. Pete's son Steve was at the academy studying agricultural sciences. Steve wanted to learn how different species grew food on their home worlds. Pete stood in his field, looking up at the stars that were invisible in the daylight sky. His boy was up there somewhere, in danger, and Pete felt completely helpless. Across the galaxy, hundreds of human parents were learning the same terrible news. Their children were trapped on a space station with armed separatists, and there was nothing they could do to help. The alien military commanders continued their planning sessions. They refined their strategy and prepared their equipment. They wanted to be absolutely certain of success before they began the operation. But for the human parents, waiting was impossible. Their children were in danger now, not hours from now. When the alien forces would finally be ready to act, Linda Carter was the first to make a decision. She contacted other human parents and suggested they take action themselves. They didn't have military training or advanced weapons, but they had something the alien commanders didn't understand: the desperate determination of parents whose children were in mortal danger. The alien elite forces had protocols and procedures. They had training and discipline. They had advanced technology and superior firepower. But the human parents had something more powerful than all of that. They had love for their children and the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect them. While the alien commanders continued their careful planning, the human parents began making their own preparations. They didn't have a sophisticated strategy or elite training. They just knew that their children needed them, and they were going to do whatever it took to reach them. Linda Carter stood in the cargo bay of the mining station, looking at the small group of humans who had answered her call. There were only 12 of them, but they were all parents with children trapped at the academy. "I know this sounds crazy," Linda said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I can't just sit here and wait while my son is in danger. The alien forces are still planning their operation. They say it will take at least 6 more hours before they're ready to move." Tony Rodriguez nodded grimly. 6 hours is too long. Anything could happen in 6 hours. Dr. Karen Wright looked around the group. "We're not soldiers. We don't have military training or advanced weapons. How can we possibly succeed where elite forces might fail?" Pete Johnson stepped forward. "Because we're parents," he said simply. "Because our kids are up there, scared and alone, and they need us." The group was quiet for a moment. They all knew the odds were against them. They were ordinary people: a maintenance worker, a mechanic, a doctor, a farmer, and several others with regular jobs and normal lives. But they all had one thing in common: their children were in danger. "What do we have for ships?" Linda asked. Tony raised his hand. "I can get us a cargo hauler. It's not fast, but it's sturdy. I have access to a medical transport," Karen said. "It has good shielding and life support systems." Pete nodded. "My crop hauler is old, but it's reliable. I've flown it through asteroid fields and solar storms." Other parents offered what they could. A teacher named Bob Miller had a small passenger shuttle. An engineer named Sue Davis could access a construction ship with heavy equipment. A shop owner named Rick Brown had a delivery vessel. None of these were military ships. They were civilian vehicles designed for peaceful purposes, but they were all these parents had. "What about weapons?" someone asked. Linda looked around the group. "We'll have to improvise. I work with industrial tools every day. Cutting torches, welding equipment, explosive charges for mining operations. We can adapt those," Tony agreed. "My repair shop has plasma cutters and hull breaches. We can modify them." The group spent the next hour gathering supplies and equipment. They raided tool shops, construction sites, and maintenance facilities. They took cutting torches, welding equipment, industrial explosives, and anything else that might be useful. They also gathered basic supplies, food, water, medical equipment, and emergency oxygen tanks. They knew they might be in space for a long time, and they wanted to be prepared. As they worked, more parents arrived. Word was spreading through the human communities, and other mothers and fathers were joining the group. Soon there were 20 people, then 30, then 40. Most of them had never been in combat. They were teachers, farmers, shopkeepers, mechanics, and office workers. They came from different planets and different backgrounds, but they all shared the same desperate need to help their children. "We need to coordinate our approach," Linda said, looking at the growing group. "We can't just fly in random directions." Karen had been studying star charts on her portable computer. The Academy is in the neutral zone, about 8 hours away at maximum speed. The alien forces are gathering at the military base on Proxima Station, which is in the opposite direction. "Good," Pete said. "That means we won't interfere with their operation." "Or they won't interfere with ours," Tony added. The parents divided into groups based on their ships and skills. Linda would lead the main assault group with the cargo hauler and several armed volunteers. Tony would command a flanking force with faster ships. Karen would coordinate medical support and rescue operations. They had no military radios, so they used civilian communication devices. They had no battle plans, so they relied on basic common sense and parental instinct. They had no training in space combat, so they decided to learn as they went out at 1500 hours. The makeshift fleet of civilian ships launched from various locations across the star system. They rendezvoused at a small asteroid field where they made final preparations. "Remember," Linda said over the communication channel, "we're not trying to be heroes. We're just trying to get our kids back. Stay together, help each other, and don't take unnecessary risks." The fleet consisted of 15 ships of various sizes and capabilities. None of them were designed for combat, but they all had one advantage. They were piloted by people who would do anything to protect their children. The journey to the Academy took 6 hours. During that time, the parents talked to each other over the communication system. They shared stories about their children, their fears, and their hopes. "My Danny loves to read," Linda said. "He's always asking questions about how things work. He was so excited about learning alien technologies." At the Academy, "My girls are fascinated by different cultures," Tony replied. "They want to be diplomats when they grow up. They think they can help bring peace to the galaxy." "Amy is studying to be a doctor," Karen added. "She wants to help all species, not just humans. She believes medicine can bridge any gap between different peoples." As they talked, the parents began to feel less alone. They realized that they all shared the same hopes and dreams for their children. They all wanted their kids to grow up in a galaxy where different species could live together in peace. When they finally reached the Academy, they could see the damage from the attack. Parts of the station were dark, and there were scorch marks on the hull where weapons had struck. Several small ships surrounded the station, the separatist forces that had taken control. "There are at least 20 enemy ships," Karen reported, studying the sensor readings. "They're spread out around the station in a defensive formation." "We're outnumbered," someone said over the communication channel. "We're always outnumbered," Pete replied. "But we're not outmotivated." Linda looked at the Academy where her son was trapped. She thought about Danny, probably scared and confused, wondering if anyone was coming to help him. She thought about all the other children, human and alien, who were counting on someone to save them. "Listen up, everyone," Linda said into her microphone. "We're not soldiers, and we're not heroes. We're just parents who love our kids. But sometimes that's enough." The civilian fleet began to move toward the Academy. They had no sophisticated battle plan, no advanced weapons, and no military training. But they had something more powerful than all of that: the desperate courage of parents whose children were in danger. The Separatist forces detected the approaching ships and began to move into attack positions. They were professional soldiers, with military equipment and combat experience. They expected to make quick work of the civilian vessels, but they had never faced human parents before. They had never encountered the fury of mothers and fathers who would rather die than let their children suffer. The battle for the Academy was about to begin, and the Separatists had no idea what they were about to face. "For our children," Linda said over the communication channel. "For our children," came the reply from 43 other parents who were ready to fight the entire galaxy to protect their kids. The Separatist commander Vex watched his tactical display with confidence as the civilian ships approached the Academy. His forces had been trained for this exact scenario, dealing with rescue attempts by untrained personnel. 15 small ships, reported his tactical officer. All civilian vessels with minimal shielding and no visible weapons. They appear to be mining and cargo ships. Vex smiled coldly. Desperate parents, no doubt. This will be over quickly. Order all squadrons to intercept. Use minimum force. We don't want to create martyrs. What Vex didn't understand was that these weren't just any parents. These were human parents, and humans came from Earth, a world that other species had classified as a death world because of its extreme dangers, an unpredictable environment. While most alien species had evolved on stable worlds with predictable weather and few natural threats, humans had survived on a planet where everything tried to kill them. Volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, ice ages, asteroid impacts, and countless predators had shaped humanity into something unique in the galaxy. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Separatist fighters engaged Linda's cargo hauler. They expected the civilian ship to retreat or surrender immediately. Instead, Linda accelerated directly toward the enemy fighters. "What is she doing?" Vex's tactical officer asked. "She's going to ram them." "No," Vex said, confusion creeping into his voice. "She's bluffing. She has to be." But Linda wasn't bluffing. She had grown up on a mining world where industrial accidents were common and split-second. Decisions meant the difference between life and death. When her ship's hull took damage from enemy fire, she didn't panic. She rerouted power from non-essential systems and kept flying. The Separatist fighters broke formation, not wanting to risk a collision. In that moment of confusion, Tony Rodriguez's flanking force struck from the side. His ships were equipped with industrial cutting tools that had been modified into makeshift weapons. "Impossible," Vex muttered as he watched his fighters scatter. "They're civilians. They should be running away." But these humans weren't running. Dr. Karen Wright used her medical transport to ram through the Separatist defensive line. When her ship was damaged, she didn't retreat for repairs. Instead, she used the damaged hull plating as improvised armor and kept fighting. Pete Johnson's crop hauler was taking heavy fire from 2 enemy ships. On any other world, a farmer would have surrendered or fled. But Pete had spent years flying through asteroid fields and solar storms to deliver his crops. He knew how to navigate through danger. He flew his ship directly into the Academy's defensive grid, using the station's own structure as cover. The Separatist ships couldn't fire on him without risking damage to the Academy itself. "They're using the station as a shield," reported the tactical officer. "They're putting their own children at risk." No, Vex realized with growing alarm. They know exactly what they're doing. They're not random civilians. They're survivors from a death world. The human parents fought with a ferocity that the Separatists had never encountered. When Linda's cargo hauler was crippled, she didn't abandon ship. Instead, She used the vessel's industrial equipment to cut through the Academy's outer hull, creating a breach that allowed her to board the station. Tony Rodriguez's ship was destroyed by enemy fire, but he and his crew had already transferred to escape pods. Instead of fleeing to safety, they used the pods as improvised assault vehicles. Ramming through the Separatist perimeter. Dr. Karen Wright's medical transport was badly damaged, but she managed to dock with the Academy's emergency medical bay. She then used her knowledge of alien biology to navigate through sections of the station that were designed for non-human species. The Separatists had prepared for a methodical assault by trained military forces. They had not prepared for the chaotic, unpredictable attack by desperate parents who ignored conventional tactics and safety protocols. They're not following any recognized combat doctrine, Vex's tactical officer reported. They're making it up as they go along. That was exactly the problem. The Separatists had trained to fight enemies who followed military procedures and logical strategies. But the human parents weren't being logical. They were being parental. When Pete Johnson's crop hauler was boarded by Separatist troops, they expected him to surrender. Instead, he used his farming tools as weapons. A plasma cutter designed for harvesting crops became a deadly weapon in the hands of a father protecting his child. The Separatists found themselves fighting enemies who wouldn't stay down. When Linda Carter was wounded by enemy fire, she didn't retreat. She crawled through ventilation shafts, using her maintenance skills to navigate the station's service tunnels. "They're inside the station," reported a Separatist squad leader. "But they're not coming through the main corridors. They're using maintenance shafts, emergency passages, and service tunnels." Vex realized with growing horror that the humans knew the Academy better than his own forces did. These parents had visited their children at the school. They had walked the corridors, attended parent meetings, and learned the layout through months of normal visits. Dr. Karen Wright used her medical knowledge to treat wounded Separatists and Academy staff alike. But she also used her understanding of alien physiology to navigate areas where the air mixture was designed for non-human species. The Separatists began to panic as the human parents seemed to appear everywhere at once. They would secure a corridor, only to find humans emerging from air vents or maintenance panels. They would guard a doorway, only to discover that the humans had cut through the walls using industrial tools. "How many of them are there?" demanded a Separatist officer. 15 ships, came the reply. "Maybe 40 to 50 individuals total. It feels like hundreds," the officer replied. "They're everywhere." The truth was that the human parents were using their Deathworld instincts to maximum advantage. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like survivors. They used every tool, every skill, and every bit of knowledge they had gained from their harsh home world. When conventional tactics failed, they improvised. When their equipment was damaged, they jury-rigged repairs. When they were outnumbered, they used speed and surprise to even the odds. Linda Carter had spent years working in dangerous mining operations. She knew how to jury-rig explosives from industrial equipment. She used her skills to create diversions and clear blocked passages. Tony Rodriguez had been repairing ships and equipment his entire adult life. He could hotwire security systems, override safety protocols, and make any machine work, even when it was damaged. The human parents didn't just fight for themselves. They fought for all the children at the Academy. When they found trapped alien students, they rescued them just as eagerly as they would rescue their own children. "The humans are freeing all the hostages," reported a Separatist squad leader. "Not just their own species, all of them." This confused the Separatists even more. They had expected the humans to focus only on rescuing their own children. But the human parents seemed to consider all the students as their responsibility. Lucy Morrison was trapped in a classroom with 15 other students when Linda Carter burst through the door. Lucy had never seen Linda before, but the woman immediately started helping all the children, regardless of their species. "We're getting you out of here," Linda said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "All of you. No one gets left behind." Zek, the young Krolix warrior, stared at Linda in amazement. "You're not even my parent. Why are you helping me?" Linda looked at the alien child with fierce determination. "Because you're somebody's child, and that's enough." The separatist resistance began to crumble as the human parents fought their way through the academy. These weren't trained soldiers following careful plans. They were desperate parents who would tear through anything to protect children. Vex watched his tactical display with growing despair. His professional military force was being defeated by a handful of civilian parents with improvised weapons and absolute determination. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "perhaps we should consider surrender." Vex looked at the display one more time. The human parents had reached the main hostage area and were beginning to free the children. His own forces were scattered and demoralized, unable to deal with an enemy that refused to follow any logical pattern. "They're not even human," he whispered. "There's something else, something we never prepared for." He was right. The human parents weren't just humans. They were Deathworlders driven by parental instinct. And there was no force in the galaxy more dangerous than that. The first elite alien forces arrived at the academy just as Linda Carter was leading the last group of rescued children to safety. Admiral Kestar's Death Commandos had finally completed their preparations and were ready to begin their carefully planned assault. What they found instead was a space station already secured by human parents, with separatist forces either captured or surrendering. "This is impossible," Admiral Kestar said, staring at his tactical display. "The operation was supposed to take our forces at least 4 hours to complete. These civilians have done it in 2. Commander Jake Morrison was among the first 2 aboard the Academy when the alien forces arrived. He had been monitoring the situation from the command ship, listening to the chaotic radio communications between the human parents as they fought their way through the station. Jake found his daughter, Lucy, in the main assembly hall, surrounded by other rescued children and exhausted human parents. Linda Carter was sitting on the floor, her clothes torn and her face covered with soot, but she was smiling as she watched the children reunite with their families. "Dad!" Lucy ran to Jake and hugged him tightly. "You should have seen them. The parents, I mean. They were amazing." Jake looked around the hall at the other parents. Many of them were injured, and all of them looked exhausted. But they were all smiling as they watched their children safe and sound. "Tell me what happened," Jake said softly. Lucy's eyes were bright with excitement. "When the separatists first attacked, we were all so scared. They moved us to the lower levels and kept us in locked rooms. We could hear fighting, but we didn't know what was going on." She paused, looking over at Linda Carter. "Then suddenly, there was this loud explosion, and the wall of our room just disappeared. And there was Mrs. Carter, covered in dust and holding some kind of cutting tool. She looked like she had been through a war." "What did she say?" Jake asked. She sighed. "Don't worry, kids. Your parents are here." Lucy smiled. "At first, we thought she meant all our parents. But then we realized she was talking about herself and the other human parents. They had come to rescue all of us, not just their own children." Jake looked over at Linda, who was now helping Dr. Karen Wright treat some of the injured separatists. The human parents weren't just celebrating their victory. They were making sure everyone was safe, including their former enemies, the alien. "Kids were so amazed," Lucy continued. "Zek kept asking how civilian humans could defeat trained soldiers. Mira was calculating the odds of our rescue and saying it was mathematically impossible. And Len was trying to find words in his 12 languages to describe what he had seen. General Vises of the Vorthic Intelligence Division approached Jake. Her pale skin was even whiter than usual, and her large eyes showed confusion and concern. "Commander Morrison," she said, "we need to understand what happened here. Our preliminary analysis suggests that 43 untrained civilians accomplished what would have required hundreds of elite soldiers." Jake nodded. "Their parents, General. They were protecting their children." "That's not an explanation," Vises replied. "Other species have parents too. But we don't see this kind of behavior. We don't see civilians charging into impossible odds without any regard for their own safety." Commander Zelen of the Selenian Pacification Corps was interviewing some of the captured separatists. His blue skin was shifting between different colors as he tried to process their statements. "The prisoners keep saying the same thing," Zelen reported. "They say the humans fought like they were possessed. They wouldn't retreat, they wouldn't surrender, and they wouldn't stop even when they were injured. They also say the humans used tactics that made no sense," added General Vises. "They improvised weapons from industrial equipment. They used maintenance tunnels as attack routes, and they coordinated their assault using civilian communication devices." Admiral Kestar approached the group, his massive form casting a shadow over the smaller beings. "I have reviewed the tactical recordings from the separatist ships," he said. "The human attack was completely unpredictable. They used no recognized military doctrine." "Because they're not military," Jake replied. "They're parents." "But what makes human parents different from other species' parents?" Vises asked. "We all care for our offspring." Jake thought about how to explain it. "Humans come from what you classify as a death world. Our entire evolution has been shaped by constant danger and unpredictable threats. We learn to make split-second decisions, to improvise solutions, and to never give up when survival is at stake." "But surely other species have protective instincts," Zelen argued. "Yes, but not like this," Jake said. "Most species evolved on stable worlds where careful planning and logical thinking were the keys to survival. Humans evolved on a world where hesitation meant death. We learned to act first and think later when our families are threatened." Pete Johnson was sitting nearby, cleaning a cut on his arm. He looked up when he heard the conversation. "My boy was in danger," he said simply. Nothing else mattered. "You could have been killed," General Vises pointed out. Pete shrugged. So could he. "At least this way, I had a chance to do something about it." Dr. Karen Wright approached the group, having finished treating the wounded. "I think there's something else the alien commanders need to understand," she said. "We didn't just rescue our own children. We rescued all the children." "Yes, that is puzzling," Admiral Kestar admitted. "Why would you risk your lives for offspring that are not your own?" Karen smiled. "Because they're children. They're someone's babies. When you're a parent, you understand that every child is precious, regardless of their species." Lucy Morrison was listening to the conversation with her alien friends. Zek, the young Krolix warrior, seemed especially interested in what the adults were saying. "My father is a great warrior," Zek said. "He has fought in many battles and won great victories. But he always tells me that the most important battle is the one you fight to protect your family." "The human parents fought like warriors," Myra observed. "But they fought for all of us, not just their own families." "In my culture, we have a saying," Len added, his skin shifting to a warm golden color. "The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack." I think human parents see all children as their pack. The alien commanders continued to study the reports and recordings from the rescue operation. They were trying to understand how civilian humans had succeeded where their elite forces might have failed. "The humans used no advanced technology," Admiral Kestar noted. "They improvised weapons from industrial equipment and used civilian ships as assault vehicles." They also ignored standard safety protocols, General Thizes added. They took risks that our forces would never consider acceptable, because the risks to their children were greater than the risks to themselves, Jake explained. When your child is in danger, personal safety becomes irrelevant. Commander Zelen was studying the psychological profiles of the human parents. Their behavior suggests a level of emotional commitment that exceeds rational calculation, he said. They were willing to sacrifice themselves for uncertain outcomes. Not uncertain, Linda Carter said, joining the conversation. Guaranteed. We were guaranteed to try everything possible to save our children. The outcome didn't matter as much as the effort. But you could have failed, Isis pointed out. You could have all died, and the children would still have been prisoners. Linda looked at the Vorthic general with fierce determination. Then at least our children would have known that we tried. They would have known that we didn't abandon them. Over the next few hours, as the academy was secured and the children were reunited with their families, the full scope of the human parents' achievement became clear. They had not only rescued all the hostages, but had also captured most of the Separatist forces intact. The Separatist commander Vex was brought before the alien commanders for interrogation. His gray skin was pale with shock, and his yellow eyes showed confusion and defeat. I don't understand what happened, Vex said. We prepared for every possible scenario. We had superior numbers, better weapons, and professional training. How did a handful of civilian parents defeat our entire operation? Admiral Kestar studied the Separatist leader. Perhaps you underestimated the power of parental instinct. No, Vex shook his head. This was something else. Something we had never encountered before. They fought like they were already dead, like they had nothing to lose. They fought like they had everything to lose, Jake corrected. Their children. The rescue operation at the Academy became a turning point in galactic politics. The story spread throughout the galaxy, carried by news networks and personal communications. Everyone wanted to know about the human parents who had accomplished the impossible. The Galactic Defense Council held a special session to honor the human parents. They were awarded the highest civilian honors that the galaxy could bestow. But more importantly, the rescue operation changed how other species viewed humanity. We have learned something important today, Admiral Kestar announced to the assembled representatives. We have learned that while we may have elite military forces, humans possess something that cannot be trained or equipped. They have an instinct to protect their young that transcends all other considerations. The human parents have shown